Smart Recovery and Craft with Cynthia Moore. Oh, my apologies. I will start with the land acknowledgement, which is actually especially meaningful to me right now, as I'm situated in Webequie First Nation this week. We acknowledge that the lands on which we're hosting this meeting include the traditional territories of many nations. The work of Medify and our partners takes place on traditional territories of the Indigenous nations who have lived in these lands since time immemorial. Medify is located in Toronto on the ancestral homelands of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Atawendrons. This is Dish with One Spoon Treaty territory. Medify is committed to reconciliation. We recognize that the many injustices experienced by the Indigenous peoples of what we now call Canada continue to affect their health and well-being. We respect and embrace the rich cultural and traditional practices of the ancestors. And we invite our partners to reflect on the territories where they are situated and to join us in committing to gaining knowledge, forging a new culturally safe relationship, and contributing to reconciliation. So as I already mentioned, please make sure that you post any comments and questions in the chat box. I meant identified as everyone rather than hosts and panelists. We're actually going to have a little break for Q&A or discussion between parts 1 and 2 of Cynthia's session, and she's already said she is really comfortable and enjoys having more interactivity and answering questions as they go. So please feel free to post your chat, and if there's something that you'd like to ask aloud, we'll figure out a way when you put your hand up for Lori to unmute you and give you that opportunity. And again, please remember to complete the evaluation at the end of this session. I don't have to thank myself, but I really appreciate the work of our 2024 webinar series committee members. And we're getting ready for 2025. But we thought that this would be a great way to end the year and move into the holidays thinking about recovery, thinking about family, thinking about the connections between families and recovery. So it's my pleasure to introduce Cynthia Moore. Cynthia's commitment to helping families with mental health and addiction problems arose from her professional background and her family's lived experience. Her training in the mental health field began in 1985 with a study of rational emotive behavior therapy, which led to certification by the Albert Ellis Institute in rational emotive behavior therapy. She also studied motivational interviewing with MI founder Dr. Bill Miller and trained with the founder of Community Reinforcement Approach Family Training, CRAFT, Dr. Bob Myers. Both of those are PhDs. When her personal experiences led her to a focus on addiction, she took the Smart Recovery training course and in 2012 started the first chapter of Smart Recovery Toronto. Cynthia has been presenting evidence-based programs with peer support to hospitals and health organizations since 2012 and has served as SMART's regional coordinator for Ontario since 2017. Cynthia now manages the Smart Recovery Toronto online and in-person meeting communities at CAMH. We are so grateful to have you. Thank you. I turn the session over to you, but if you need a break at any time, I'm here and I will be sort of collating all of the questions and comments as we go.
Perfect. That's one thing I can't pay attention to the chat when I'm engaged in presenting, so I really appreciate your support. And thank you so much for inviting me. I was very excited when I had this opportunity. I've been waiting for this opportunity for quite some time, considering I brought Smart Recovery to Ontario in 2012, and back in the day I was rolling around with a briefcase and doing a lot of presenting, and Wiplav Lamba was one of the most helpful people who engaged me on the committee at St. Mike's, the ECHO project, which we were actually doing these presentations. So hence I have this lovely PowerPoint that I made for those purposes. So it's great to be here all these years later and presenting to the professional community. I must say right up front, people who are running Smart Recovery meetings are all trained. You need to be trained. You can't just sign up and start doing a meeting. And 98% of the people who have been trained in Ontario since 2012 are professionals. And I'm very excited about that because I realized we needed to build some credibility in the industry. And so it's very exciting for me to be here. So thanks again for having me. I will put the screen up here. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Okay, smart recovery. Life beyond addiction is the sort of tagline that we use. SMART actually stands for self-management and recovery training. Smart Recovery is a global, evidence-based, not-for-profit mental health and addiction support organization. We provide a 4-points program. We offer online and in-person support meetings for people seeking independence from any kind of addictive behaviors. The 5 stages of change help people understand where they are in the process of mental health and addiction recovery. Motivational interviewing techniques encourage those who are willing to make a change. The community reinforcement approach, family training, which we call CRAFT, offers a psychoeducational program for what we call CSOs. You'll learn more about that later, which are the family members and friends who want to be helpful and supportive to their LOs. We refer to their loved ones in recovery. Participants learn REBT and CBT skills and techniques. This includes rational emotive and cognitive behavioral therapy. Rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, was developed by Dr. Albert Ellis in 1955. Cognitive behavior therapy is based on adaptations that stem from REBT in the 1960s that began by Dr. Aaron Beck. The 5 stages of change was developed by Prochaska and DiClementa in 1979. It was based on the initial trial that they ran at their Rhodes Scholars that did a trial watching people how to stop smoking. And that is how we ended up with the 5 stages of change. CRAFT, the community reinforcement approach for family and friends, was developed by Dr. Bob Myers, PhD, in 1976. So a lot of these models have been around for quite some time. Motivational interviewing techniques were developed by Dr. Bob Miller, PhD, in 1983. Mindfulness-based relaxation techniques and meditation practices, we support that within our program. They've been practiced for centuries throughout the world by Aboriginal tribes and Native communities. In the Western world, it was introduced for common purposes in 1979. Many of you may have heard of John Kabat-Zinn, Daniel Goleman, and Richard Davidson. They pioneered the spirit of mindfulness as a daily practice. There is data now available to support that it is a helpful practice for people who are struggling with mental health and addiction problems. How REBT and CBT differ. This is always something that we get many questions about. REBT and CBT both affirm human emotions and behavior are predominantly generated by ideas, beliefs, attitudes, and thinking, never by the events themselves. Consequently, changing one's thinking leads to an emotional and behavioral change. The first difference is philosophic. REBT addresses the philosophic basis of emotional disturbance, as well as the cognitive distortions, which is the main focus of CBT. As you uproot and realize you're absolutistic, of lots of made up names by Dr. Albert Ellis, demands and your cognitive distortions can be corrected. For example, suppose you plan to ask somebody out for a second date, you're feeling anxious. You tell yourself, she didn't talk or smile much on our first date. I know she's not interested. Since there are multiple other explanations for her reserved behavior, which you know by her actions, you don't know, sorry, by her actions, CBT calls this conclusion mind reading and dismisses it as a cognitive distortion that needs to be challenged. Instead, REBT looks at the emotional quotient and underlying reason that you jump to this conclusion. For example, you tell yourself, I absolutely need her acceptance. If she rejects me, it will be awful. I could not stand it, and it proves that I'm a loser. Will never succeed with any woman. These are the things that we tell ourselves in these sequences when their emotions are fluid. The second difference is unconditional self-acceptance, which we call USA. REBT presents an elegant solution to the self-worth problem. It teaches unconditional self-acceptance rather than any type of self-rating, which is generally deemed unhelpful. Self-rating has many pitfalls, including having low self-worth when we do poorly and make unpleasant comparisons to others. We avoid risk-taking, become complacent, and have a preoccupation to proving ourselves with the need to measure up, rather than enjoying ourselves. Unconditional self-acceptance helps us avoid the self-rating trap and the many problems associated with self-rating. USA consists of the philosophy of unconditionally accepting ourselves as the imperfect or fallible humans that we are. Whether we do well or poorly, others will like, love, dislike, or hate us. The third difference is helpful negative emotions. REBT is unique amongst CBT therapies in differentiating between self-destructive, inappropriate negative emotions versus helpful, appropriate negative emotions. For example, some degree of anxiety actually does help us stay safe. The fourth difference is all anger is inappropriate. CBT views some anger as healthy and appropriate. Counter to this, REBT maintains that all anger is simply unhelpful, and it has a commanding, condemning, and dictatorial core. REBT distinguishes clearly between two different types of difficulties: practical problems and emotional problems. Your flawed behavior, unfair treatment of others, and undesirable situations represent practical problems. Regrettably, your human tendency is to upset yourself about these practical problems, thereby unnecessarily creating irrational thoughts that lead to emotional disturbance. We often refer to emotional disturbance, or how am I disturbing myself with what I'm telling myself? Recognize that neither another person nor adverse circumstance can ever disturb you. Only you can disturb yourself based on your thinking. The classic question we ask in REBT to a client is, what am I telling myself to disturb myself about this situation? REBT's comprehensive approach works best for individuals desiring a scientific and mindful, present-focused treatment. REBT addresses the latter by helping you take responsibility for your distress. It helps you accept your distress, work through it, as opposed to avoiding it and having it build in intensity. CBT mainly focuses on the ways we distort our thinking and challenging those actual thoughts that result in uncomfortable feelings. So it rarely addresses the emotional quotient. REBT is more focused on how we are emoting when we are reactive in an emotional sense. We're trying to challenge these thoughts and feelings so that we can actually respond in a more effective way. REBT reinforces our preferences for a positive outcome. Preference 1, as opposed to self-rating, I strongly prefer to do well and get approval. But even if I fail, I will accept myself fully on my own terms. The preference number 2, these are just examples. I strongly prefer that I be treated reasonably, kindly, and lovingly. But since I don't run the universe and it's part of our human nature to err, I then cannot control this. This is also related to the locus of control. Preference number 3, I strongly prefer that life be fair, easy, and hassle-free. And it's very frustrating that it isn't. But I can bear frustration and still enjoy life, tolerating its ups and downs. So what we're trying to do is actually move people towards a preference statement or effective new belief when we're having emotional disturbance. The 10 benefits from learning REBT and CBT in addiction recovery. We no longer avoid events, and anxiety no longer restricts what we do in life. Number 2, progress against social anxiety occurs much faster. Number 3, we are energized to keep moving forward when we realize small successes. Number 4, behavioral change affects brain physiology. Number 5, we learn to act on the world as opposed to being passive toward it. Number 6, we can expect better outcomes over time. 7, we can calm down and relax. 8, our belief about ourselves change. 9, we learn to control our thinking. 10, we become rational thinkers. Many of you might be familiar with the 5 stages of change. This is a short diagram. Contemplation is when we're aware that a problem, we're not aware that the problem actually exists. We're in active addiction. Normally something will happen in pre-contemplation. There's no intention of changing at that point, but what we call the activating event takes place, and then that shifts us into contemplating that there may be a problem. We're aware it exists because the activating event took place, but there's still no real commitment to action. From contemplation, we move into preparation. This is a really important piece, I believe, because it's when people are more open to change. They're not fully committed yet, but in that particular stage, we will encourage them to check out what sort of resources are available. We find that the more resources people are aware of and they have more choices, the more readily they will make an actual choice versus having one particular choice, like an ultimatum. So preparation is an important piece, I believe, where they need a lot of support. And then, of course, when we're in active, we're in action mode, we're actively modifying our behavior and working with the plan, putting the plan into action. And then from action, we move into maintenance, which is the sustained change behavior, the new behavior that replaces the old. Of course, from time to time, there is, slips and setbacks happen in recovery. I'm trying to change the terms lapse and relapse because I still think they have a bit of a negative connotation. But certainly it's going to take us many years to get rid of this term. It's with us, but it's when you fall back into the old patterns and the old behavior, and then you can quickly, make the changes necessary to get back into contemplating what has to be changed. What does evidence-based mean in addiction recovery? Does anybody have any ideas? Does anybody like to answer that question? When we say evidence-based, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Jennifer?
Well, for me, what comes to mind, I'll just jump in and others can add in their chat, is there being some kind of scientific literature comparing one type of intervention with another and using a structured or objective measure of success in order to be able to determine that the shift was associated with that particular type of intervention.
Good answer. It's funny how these terms they've been thrown around so much, and people often have different interpretations, and it often comes up when I'm doing these presentations. So that's a good description. I've put something more into this slide for the purposes of dealing with service providers. So a widely used adjective in education, evidence-based refers to any concept or strategy that is derived from or informed by objective evidence, which is exactly what Jennifer has stated. At its most basic level, evidence-based mental health and addiction treatment uses therapies and methods that have been shown to be successful for addiction recovery, according to research and scientific testing methodologies. It is an approach to medicine, education, and other disciplines that emphasizes the practical application of the findings of the most current research and updated information. So I think that's one important piece as well, is that we're constantly challenging and updating information. There's a lot more being done in the present, and we're constantly evolving and making those changes according to the new evidence, as opposed to staying with something that might be 10 years old or 15 years old. Evidence-based psychotherapy encompasses both scientific and local evidence, such as diagnostic patient information, situational information, a situation in which the client is in, and the provider's judgment and experience to achieve the best outcome. An evidence-based approach to decision-making is based on a combination of using critical thinking and the best available evidence to support the decision-making process. And this is important with smart recovery and the work that we're doing with CRAFT, because motivational interviewing is a huge part of what we're doing in a much bigger way, even since I actually joined Smart Recovery in 2011. So that's an important piece, is that we're helping people use their critical thinking for the decision-making process in terms of change. REBT and CBT tools and techniques, motivational interviewing, and the aforementioned models that Smart Recovery Program represents are all evidence-based. Just to be clear, Smart Recovery was founded by a committee of physicians, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists in 1994. We celebrated our 30th anniversary in 2024 this year, so we're excited about that. We are a global organization. We offer over 3,000 online and in-person meetings that are facilitated by trained peer volunteers, and in Canada, mostly professional mental health and addiction caseworkers. Volunteer meetings are open to the public in over 35 countries worldwide. There are also closed meetings held in private treatment facilities, and many private facilities use this program. We have materials, we have all our tools and techniques are available at the Smart Recovery main website. We also have handbooks for people who struggle with addiction, and handbooks specifically for facilitators, and handbooks for family and friends. So that it's very educational. There are also, we are translated in 19 different languages, so we're very excited about that. The global outreach is really happening pretty prolifically. This particular Smart Recovery is recognized by the American Academy of Family Physicians, Stanford University School of Medicine, National Institute on Drug Abuse, the American Society of Addiction Medicine. I simply have to update that. I didn't have time for this particular presentation, but there's certainly a great many more institutions that are recognizing Smart Recovery. This is not really as important for everybody to see, but it's also great in terms of partners, advocates, and referrals in Ontario. What I would like to actually draw your attention to is the lettering in blue. The Toronto Regional website offers 14 open public meetings per week, including an online Spanish language meeting on Saturday at 1 p.m. In Toronto, we have 2 in-person meetings, one that represents the LGBT community at headquarters on Bay Street on a Monday evening. We also are very excited to say that we did have the CAMH meeting for 7 years before the COVID hit, and now it's back in action as of late October. So we're very excited, and we are open for business Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Got a very active volunteer community keeping that going, and we're pretty excited about that. All of those meetings you can find at smartrecoverytoronto.com. Okay, this is our position on taking medications. Smart Recovery supports the scientifically informed use of psychological treatment and legally prescribed psychiatric and addiction medication. Is addiction a disease? Smart Recovery tools can help you regardless of whether or not you believe it is a disease. We tend to think that it's not really that relevant at this point. People are still calling it a disease, and there's a lot of question around whether that is promoting more stigma. Our position on religion, spirituality, and mindfulness and meditation. Smart Recovery supports the use of religious or spiritual beliefs and practices in recovery as a personal choice. It's not part of our program. We do share a great many resources in terms of mindfulness, self-compassion, all that sort of the movement of the mindfulness. We do have lots of practical, mindful people that are engaged in the volunteer network, and we're going to be building all those pieces of our program. But at this point, we don't have a great deal of mindfulness in our actual handbooks. Smart Recovery believes that the participant is not powerless over their addiction. Using these tools, we increase self-empowerment, which fosters the ability and capacity to change addictive behaviors. The personal power resides within each individual and does not depend on adherence to any particular spiritual viewpoint. Our motto is discover the power of choice. And there are so many choices that we get to make in a day. It's not simply, whether I engage in my addiction or not. And we do a lot of discussion in and around making better choices with regard to nutrition, well-being, everyday decision-making. At a Smart Recovery meeting, we learn how to become self-empowered, changing unwanted habits, replacing addictive behaviors with new pursuits and activities. We even have activity lists. To a great degree, we are trying to help people with their making change. We are accepted into a community that believes we have the capabilities within ourselves to make the lifestyle changes and helpful choices. It's very positive reinforcement, and it's a kindness and compassion-based organization. We don't call each other out. We don't tell each other what to do. We even teach people how to use I statements, what worked for me, that kind of thing. It's more of a brainstorming session, if you will, because there's a lot of crosstalk and we're exchanging ideas, trying to be helpful. We appreciate the necessity of having a good support network and support people for success in recovery. We do not have the sponsorship program type thing set up, but certainly we encourage keeping in building a support network. We recognize small successes and set reasonable goals we can achieve over time. All meetings are held by trained facilitators who are professional mental health case workers or volunteers with lived experience. At Smart Recovery, we dispel the stigma associated with mental health and addiction. We pay close attention to the language that we use. Smart Recovery and CRAFT use positive reinforcement techniques. We refer to the participants' addictive behavior. We deal with specific behaviors. We avoid unhelpful labels like addict or alcoholic, or referring to addiction as a disease. When participants are no longer engaging in their addictive behavior and feel content in sobriety, they experience what we call a quantum shift in thinking. This is when we achieve the lifestyle balance that is the fourth point. We consider this the maintenance stage of recovery. I definitely like to encourage people that this is a continuum. There is a lot of controversial discussion about, stopping and no longer needing to be in recovery. So we're still sort of playing around with what that means in terms of maintenance stage. But as being an evidence-based, we're always open to a discussion on that basis. We encourage alumni who are doing well to come back and be helpful to those who are starting in the program, to take the facilitator training to facilitate a meeting in the region, or contribute to our online community meetings, which is, we have several co-hosts in our meetings, which is always very helpful. Here are the 4 points. Point 1, building and maintaining motivation. We might have experienced a natural consequence, and we're now open to new ideas. This is where we discover our reasons for changing, building momentum, and the motivation to keep learning and growing. The tool examples I will be showing you in a minute: cost-benefit analysis, hierarchy of values, change plan worksheet, 3 questions exercise. We are focused more on values, our values being in alignment with our behavior, as opposed to many goals. We're working more with people in terms of what they value to help them stay motivated. Point 2, coping with urges. Learning how to cope with cravings and urges is an important part of the process. We have techniques that can guide us through accepting them and allowing them to pass. A lot of this also has to do with mindfulness, and it becomes easier over time. We dispel the myths about urges. We learn a lot about cravings and urges. We do a lot of psychoeducation in Smart Recovery meetings. We learn more about what triggers us, our personal risk factors. We go over many different types of risk factors because they're different for everyone, and cognitive distortions, of course. Point 3, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. This is where the REBT comes in. We have tools to help us cope with sadness, anger, anxiety, frustration, and other upsets in life. We can help build communities in families that we can build basic life skills. Most people benefit from learning some of these tools and techniques, I believe. Many of these tools are the rationally emotive, the cognitive techniques, A, B, C, D, E worksheets. We have mindfulness activities, self-compassion activities, and meditation. Point 4, living a balanced life. This is when our values and our goals are aligned. We have pursued new interests that replace our addiction. We often bring up the point that what are we going to replace all of that energy and activity with? That's always on the docket in terms of discussions. We are content with life in general, and we're able to cope with the challenges that life brings. So this is the one of the first, I put a few intro to give you an idea of what our tools look like. When we're doing in-person meetings, we have clipboards, and we'll often have these printed out, and everybody sits down with their clipboard and we do it together. It's interactive that way. Change plan worksheet. This is, you know, questions we ask, changes I want to make, how important it is, scale from 1 to 10, how confident I am, scale from 1 to 10, most important reasons I'd like to make these changes. So we're really sort of helping people figure out where they want to start, the steps I plan to take, how other people can help me, the person that can actually help me, the kind of help that they can offer. This is an important piece because many times we'll think, oh, well, my best friend's very helpful, but they might not, you know, be as busy, or they might be too busy and not as accessible as maybe a neighbor that is really, you know, interested in being more helpful to me. I will know my plan is working when, and then some things that could interfere with my plans. In other words, just trying to be prepared for things that might get in the way. The cost benefit analysis, I think, is one of our best tools. You can do it many, many times. You can do it for leaving relationships. You can do it for whether I should leave a job. The thing that I like to point out about it is pros and cons are not really as helpful because we can understand what our pros and cons are. But here we have 4 quadrants, and the pros and cons of staying with the behavior and the pros and cons of not staying with the behavior makes it very clear that these, you know, this problematic instant gratification ends up in, you know, long-term pain, short-term gain. You can actually see it, and that comes up often in the meetings where people will say, oh my goodness, it's right here. This is exactly, you know, how I'm suffering, and this is how, you know, what it's going to cost me. This is the ABCDE worksheet. A, as many of you may understand, is the activating event, what's taken place. The belief, Albert Ellis uses the term belief here because it's something that we believe to be 100% true. It's not simply our thoughts. It's the belief we have that we've convinced ourselves in terms of the emotional disturbance, because what I'm thinking and what I'm believing to be true is going to have a consequence. So the consequence is, you know, I'm feeling angry, depressed, whatever that is. And then we have the wonderful disputation questions, which is how we dispute with logic whatever we're thinking in the B that's, you know, resulting in the C. We dispute that, and then we can come up with an effective new belief that's less emotive. And we can actually, this is just an add-on, how do I feel now that I've gone through this process? The disputation questions, which many of you probably used in your practice. What is the evidence to support this idea? What is the evidence against this idea? Whatever it is that I'm believing about what happened. Is there an alternative explanation? What's the worst that can happen? Have I lived through something like this before? Chances are I might have. Maybe I had some resilience. On a scale from 1 to 10, how bad is it really? Could I live through this again? What's the best thing that can happen? What's the most realistic outcome if I'm thinking this way? And what would I tell a friend in the same situation? We find that is a very good question because we often, you know, treat our friends much better than we treat ourselves when the inner critic is there. And how might somebody else interpret this situation? So this just gives us some objectivity. And what I usually suggest to clients and participants is pick one or two that you really find can be most helpful to you or that resonate with you most, and use them as a coping statement when you're having a moment. These are frequently asked questions. What is the scientific foundation on which smart recovery is built? Interestingly, Dr. Albert Ellis, he studied, you know, the Greek philosophers, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and that's where he came to the conclusion that what we think makes us feel, therefore we act. These ideas go back to these philosophers. The 5 stages of change, of course, with Prochaska and Di Clemente, was the smoking cessation, and then Dr. Bill Miller's motivational interviewing in 1983, which we discussed earlier. Is smart recovery as effective as 12 steps? This is an interesting question. People want to ask these questions all the time. From a scientific perspective, the effectiveness of all support groups for addictive behavior is, largely unproven. The only way to answer that question is to attend meetings from all available groups and reach a personal conclusion about the best approach from their own perspective for the individual who's in recovery. Whatever works best is the best for the individual. How smart recovery differs from the 12-step program. It's scientific, it has a scientific foundation, not a spiritual one. Smart recovery teaches increasing self-efficacy, self-reliance, and autonomy, because that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to govern oneself. Smart recovery meetings are crosstalk discussion based, where we present tools and techniques that are helpful in recovery along with the discussion. So we're teaching people ways of coping throughout the discussion, and we brainstorm, exchanging ideas with one another rather than listening to one particular speaker. We don't do a lot of, there are shares in meetings, but they're very brief in terms of being relational, as opposed to listening to a speaker with a long story. That's not really how we run the meetings. Smart recovery encourages attendance for as long as it is helpful. And basically, I say to them, it's a continuum of care. It's something you always want to be engaged with when you struggle. There are no sponsors in the Smart Recovery program. However, again, we appreciate the necessity for support people, and we provide a strong and inclusive support network. Many folks at meetings will exchange information and be supportive to one another on a personal level. Smart recovery discourages the use of unhelpful labels, as we mentioned earlier, like alcoholic or addict. You don't have to present that way, but if they do, that's fine. And if it works for them, that's fine too. There's no sort of right or wrong. We're very accepting of whatever is best for people. Smart recovery dispels the stigma associated with mental health and addiction recovery. So that is the Smart Recovery slides finished. Does anybody have any specific questions that I might be able to answer?
Please put some in the chat, but I definitely do. I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit of what a meeting looks like or feels like. How is it structured? Because I'm really interested in those worksheets and wondering how is that implemented in a group kind of basis?
Great question. We don't actually have that in these slides, which I should probably have thought of, but basically we do a check-in. It's a very short check-in. It's basically your first name, what brings you here. So people will say alcohol brings me here, mental health and alcohol bring me here, cocaine brings me here, gambling brings me here, sex, porn, whatever the situation may be. People are absolutely safe in our rooms, and they will describe whatever their addiction is. Something positive that's happened recently, because we like to pay attention to the fact that positive things do happen, especially if people are struggling and they're not having a good day. It's nice to hear that there are good things happening. And then something that might be challenging them that week. And basically, we get the agenda for the meeting based on the challenges that present. If several people have had problems dealing with urges, we'll jump straight to that when we finish with the check-in. And we always have things prepared. We always have tools prepared, whether it's in person or with the clipboards. And we have posters that we made at the CAMH in-person meeting. We're prepared with things, but often the group sort of presents with challenges, and then we just jump straight into that discussion. And then what we do is we weave the tools in and out of the discussion. People will ask some questions, we'll give some discussion about it, and then we will weave to the monitor and say, okay, let's do the cost benefit analysis. So-and-so is struggling with urges, and Tammy's struggling as well. Is it okay, everyone, if we do, we're always asking permission, because this is what we promote in terms of the craft model. And they all go, yes, that's a great idea. Let's help these people. And then basically we'll ask, okay, well, has anybody, hands up, has anybody had an urge recently? Of course they have. Would you like to share with us how you manage that urge? So then we get the participation, and then we also go through the actual tool and the questions that are involved in the monitor. Then we come back and bring it back into discussion. And then we can also change. Once we finish that particular tool, we'll change depending on what other comments are happening. But I always make notes. We make notes during check-in so that we want to cover certain challenges. But it's basically the challenges that everybody uses that particular check-in, because it's the challenges that we want to be helpful with in the moment. And then, of course, at the end, we have a checkout, which is mostly gratitude and something they've taken away from tonight's meeting, because I find that's the most important piece. I really appreciate people who stay till the end of the meeting, because we can all learn exactly what each other learned. That's the sweet spot from my perspective. People that lob off, 10, 20 minutes before the end, I'm like, oh, we missed a takeaway. But I'm trying to encourage people to stay, because it's really important we can all learn, what each other has learned. So that's basically the structure. Just check in, discussion and tools, and then check out.
And it's about an hour? Is that
60 to 90 minutes. Most of the online meetings are 90 minutes. They're quite large. So the check-ins can take, 20 to 30 minutes when we've got 30. We have anywhere from 25 to 40 people. We've got 2 gentlemen right now that have over 90 people. There's an app in the US that has made us very popular. The Toronto meetings are very popular because we've mentored everybody the same way. So we're very structured with our meetings, and that's something that's up for debate. I don't think it's as quality oriented, and it's more webinar type the way it's turning out. They don't do complete check-ins, but they are there to be helpful to people, and that's important. I just prefer to have the more intimate meetings where there's cameras on and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But each facilitator makes their own choice based on how they want to run their meeting. Any
I
other
want to come
questions?
back to yes, there's a few in the chat, and I always have more. So a question from Mark Dagger: is it a drop-in model where participants go to sessions as frequently as they want? And part 2, connected, is there an expectation for the number of sessions participants attend to learn? He said all the skills. I'm sure you would say you've never learned all the skills, but I understand his question, right? Like, are you cycling through a list of topics?
Yes. Well, basically, it's a drop-in. Absolutely, you come as often as you want. The commitment is personal. Some people buy handbooks, they're very engaged. Some people don't buy handbooks, they just come to the meetings. But we always have printed material in the online meetings. We're always putting, so they can download all the tools and the resources that we have. So it's basically always a personal choice. They're welcome, they're safe, and they can come as often as they want. People will often leave, you don't see them for a while, and then they come back and they're very, they're welcomed. Oh, hello, so-and-so, here you are, you're back. So it's really based on the individual. They make their own decisions about what they want to do and what they want to engage in. And we're just there to be helpful. Does that answer your question, Mark?
I'm going to say yes on his behalf, but feel free to add. I'm going to read a comment/question aloud, if that's okay, Cynthia. From Cayman Wood, who says, I run an addictions relapse prevention group where we go through stages of change, triggers and urges, and what some risks are for someone to relapse, i.e. what to be mindful of when in recovery. I don't necessarily like the idea of a one-size-fits-all for a therapy model, such as CBT, ACT, now REBT. What would you recommend would be a good activity from SMART that really promotes the idea of mindfulness and reflection? I really like the listing of upsides and downsides for both continuing a behavior and not continuing.
Interestingly, I am all over mindfulness because I've actually engaged with it myself a great deal in the last 5 to 6 years. And we have participants that are actually engaged in mindfulness communities and societies who attend the meetings. So we are doing a great deal of work. I have slides that I've actually made about mindfulness and, different ways that they can work it through adding the CBT. I've got documents that I've made from Dr. Seth Gillian, who's an Australian doctor. They are flashcards that I used to use with clients when I had my home office before COVID. And so I've made documents. So we do share a huge amount of that information. It's not in the Smart Recovery Handbook because we've evolved after COVID with a lot of CBT and mindfulness tools and techniques that are little intro tools. So we're strongly supporting the mindfulness approach and having it go beyond simply, understanding that it's about meditation. It's many things. I actually work with First Nations and I practice Native spirituality myself. So it's something that we're actually building on and sharing a lot of resources. Smart Recovery, they're updating their handbooks now. So we'll see what they come up with in the US in terms of mindfulness, but they've supported it, but they don't actually have it as part of the program. But we do a lot of work at this point from that perspective. And we have many, many different types of tools, the values tools, there's all sorts of different tools and techniques that we have that I can't even describe them all. These are just a few that I showed that are sort of the introductory tools, but there's lots and lots of different things that we use.
Do you want to maybe take that as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the materials that go along with Smart Recovery, whether they're because I think there are workbooks and sheets, but there are also a whole set of information or guides for facilitators. If I'm
Yes, there are.
correct.
When you take the training, you get a whole package. So you get the facilitator manual, you get the facilitator workbook, and people basically develop their meetings the way they choose to, based on what they feel like presenting that night. It's I don't have them. You have to buy them online. We have a Canadian post office that they run out of Calgary, but it's very expensive with shipping. If they go to the CAMH meetings, we sell them there. So they can, at the CAMH meeting, we have books for sale. A wonderful volunteer actually bought a huge box of books, so they're for sale down there.
That's amazing. I have a totally separate
question. There's too many tools for me to go through everything. There's a lot. It's endless.
I know we're going to move on to talking about craft, but I have a one question I want to ask first. I know that it seems as though you're working hard to not sort of be directly comparing AA or 12-step meetings and Smart Recovery, although it's a little bit inevitable, right? That's what people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, in the 12-step meetings, regardless of the particular substance someone is using, they could go to any other meeting. But regardless, there's still, they're often sort of categorized, and there's an expectation that someone is going to AA versus NA versus CA. Yeah. Smart Recovery obviously is inclusive and not only of all substance use disorders, but it sounds like of other addictive disorders and behaviors as well. Yes. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how that actually works in practice and what you see as some of the benefits or potentially some of the pitfalls of having people at so many different stages and also different sort of types of problematic behaviors.
Well, what's interesting is we've had many discussions over the years. Should we have a newcomers only meeting? Should we have an alumni meeting? Should we split things up? And I've always said no, because having people at every level of recovery is really important, because the people that are starting out, that aren't quite sure, that are apprehensive, that are feeling quite nervous about turning up, the people that are at a different level can give them hope, and they have a lot to offer, and they give all sorts of great ideas, and they can really learn. I think what's really important to understand about Smart Recovery meeting is it's a think tank. It's a learning opportunity. It moves. When you're facilitating of smart recovery meeting well, it just keeps moving. It's not based on people telling their stories. It's about solutions. And we offer so many different types of solutions. We do a great deal of psychoeducation. We teach people what cravings are, the difference between cravings and urges. What are the different things that I can do when I have an urge? All the different types of risk factors, not just opportunity. Or, we have long lists of what all the different risk factors are. And we'll go through all of those lists with everyone. And people are welcome to jump out and discuss whatever one is their favorite. Everybody's got their favorite risk factor. Everybody's, whether it's boredom, opportunity, fantasizing, it's very interactive and participative. When we're doing the meetings as well, we get everybody to read the slides. So when somebody has read a slide, after they read it, we'll say, anything particular resonate with you there? So it's very evocative. We're constantly evoking Socratic questioning using the motivational interviewing techniques to get people going and to get them thinking and to get them sort of engaged. And that's where the sweet spot is in a smart meeting, is when the facilitator is simply just keeping everyone going and they are all giving all of the information that's necessary. So when you've got your alumni, it's fantastic. My Thursday meeting right now, I've got about 12 people that are really in solid recovery, and it's fantastic. They've been with us for quite a few years, and they're there every week, and they're there to be supportive to those newcomers that are feeling a little apprehensive. And creating a safe space is the most important thing for us. We're very, very diligent about people feeling safe. And we have a code of conduct that we read, and we say being kind and compassionate invites more productive interaction. We don't call each other out. We don't tell each other what to do. That's dealt with. So there's a respectful nature of these meetings, and it's very inclusive from that perspective. You can listen if you're, apprehensive and not sure. Absolutely. But chances are most people that are just listening, they often jump in because it's that kind of environment where we're really engaging and we really enjoy the participation. It's your room full of peers. I say it's your congregation, right? We use that term. So it is quite helpful to have people from different stages of recovery, because then we learn more from all the different stages, in my opinion, from what I've been doing.
Well, speaking of learning more, I'm imagining that is part of what happens in craft. So I'm going to I invite you to take a breath and a drink of water. Moving into part 2 and your slides, but I feel like this was a great start to segue into that section.
Well, it's great that you're learning a little more about what smart recovery is. I will make sure that I get how a meeting is structured. It is structured, and all the meetings are the same. And I think that's one thing is quite good, is you're at a smart meeting when you're at a smart meeting, because it's structured in those 3 segments. Let's go back to can everyone see?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Dr. Myers has signed off on this, I'm happy to say, because I developed these slides when I was presenting to Addiction Studies Canada. So, an introduction to the community reinforcement approach. So there are acronyms and terms that we use in CRAFT. CRA means community reinforcement approach. CRAFT is the family training portion of it. The CSO is a concerned significant other, the person who's trying to be helpful to the person who has the addiction problem. The LO is what we call the loved one. That's the person with the addiction problem. And in some instances, we call it the IP, the identified patient, depending on who we're dealing with. SMART goals, I think you're all aware of: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time limited. We certainly have adopted that. So community reinforcement approach is a motivational interviewing behavior therapy for families and people with addiction problems to open the conversation and discuss the possibility of going into treatment. That's the ultimate goal in many cases, but it's also basically just helping the families communicate through this problematic situation. Asking open-ended questions. We actually teach people, what open-ended questions are, how to use them. We do a lot of role play in the family and friends meetings. My husband's actually doing a meeting as we speak. He's doing the family and friends meeting on Wednesday night. Asking open-ended questions using I statements. Again, we have all sorts of slides and we go through that and share how to do that sort of thing. Reflective listening, summarizing with positive reinforcement are the key components to the model. The family training is just equipping the family with supportive tools and communication techniques to encourage their loved one rather than engaging in the confrontational negative reinforcement. Reinforcing negative behavior is what everybody gets caught up in when they're overly emotional and frightened and in that situation. The loved one experiences natural consequences of their addictive behavior, and the family build a reward base to help maintain motivation and create incentive for change. So this all sounds very easy, and it's not, as we know, but it's just trying to help them change the dynamics in the family, trying to help people focus more on their self than on the person that's got the addiction problem, because that always tends to take over. And, not a lot of good happens in terms of communication. Most people are coming from a place of fear. They're afraid for safety, and not just physical safety, emotional safety. They don't feel safe around their loved ones. So we're trying to help them learn different techniques and strategies like descriptive praise. What is a way of actually praising? It may sound crazy to you, but somebody puts out the recycling, and that's a great big deal when they've been struggling with addiction and they haven't been out of their room for 3 days. So learning how to describe what they've done well in a positive manner and rewarding the positive behaviors is basically what this is about, positive reinforcement. Consequences from addictive behavior are important for loved ones to experience. And in many cases, we don't use the term enabling. It's an overused word, is what we call it. But we get caught up in these dynamics and these patterns. So we're just trying to help people learn new ways to engage with their loved one, drawing boundaries, being consistent, following through with the boundaries, letting them experience consequences as opposed to trying to prevent it, because natural consequences, scientifically proven that when they experience natural consequences, it is more helpful. It also requires careful consideration. We never ever, we don't believe in tough love, and we don't believe in letting people hit rock bottom. It's all about how can we communicate better. How can I take care of myself because I'm losing it, because my loved one is in such bad shape? The overarching goal for this communication strategy is to help decrease defensiveness on the part of the loved one and increase the chances of the CSO's message to be heard, so they don't close off. Also, this process increases the CSO's ability to understand more about the problem and ways to be more effective and less emotionally reactive. That's where some of the CBT techniques come in. The 4 basic goals for CSOs when a loved one is abusing substances and refusing to get help, crafted, designed to help families learn practical and effective ways to accomplish these 4 goals. This was based, when Bob Myers developed this process in the 80s, it was based on alcohol and alcoholism, as it were. We're going to be changing a lot of this because we're dealing with all kinds of different, we're doing gaming, there's a lot of gaming addictions and even phone addiction and all this sort of thing with some younger people. So we will be opening up this particular bit, but help your loved one reduce your alcohol and drug use, improve communication and understanding in the family, encourage their loved one towards treatment. This allows for discussion, of several options for the loved one to consider, as opposed to one option as an ultimatum. We certainly encourage what kind of resources are out there. Thank heavens, in 2024, there's a lot more options. When my son was struggling with addiction way back in 2009, we got turned down by Sunnybrook Hospital. We had to hustle him out of the country to the Arizona desert, and there were no programs for our son when he was really struggling. So this is actually where we found the craft model, was in the Arizona desert. We were involved in a native based program that helped us in this exact way. So improving our own lives instead of focusing on the loved one's addiction and the communication problems that are associated with it. Again, here's the SMART goals, which we've already gone through. Benefits. Okay, the benefits for families. I call it the mediation method. It's very different than the Johnson intervention. The Craft mediation method was developed with the belief that family members can make an important contribution in other areas of the loved one's life. The family members have been observing the loved one's behavior with objectivity, because they're not actually the person that's in the addiction. So they can actually be more helpful if they're engaged with these techniques. We have many great, Bob Myers developed a wonderful 7 tips for positive communication. They're very simplistic and they're very, very good. The love principle is listening, offering, validating, empathizing. Descriptive praise I mentioned earlier. How do you praise somebody who's finally cleaned their room, or they haven't been drinking for a while? There's ways of describing what you see that somebody has done so that they actually feel the benefit that from that comment when they're not in a good headspace. The CSO can play a powerful role in helping to engage the loved one who is feeling ambivalent and unwilling for change. When discussing various options and being open to different options as possibilities, instead of a stern ultimatum, we can open up the conversation on the loved one's terms. It's ultimately their decision. I often say that when you present somebody with 4 to 5 options, there's lots to consider. If you give them one option, it's an ultimatum. If you give them 2 options, it's still an ultimatum, because it's either or. But when a third option comes into the equation, and even a 4th, now there's something for me to consider. So I've got more to think about, as opposed to just pushing back and saying no. Well, there's all these other options. You can think about it. Take your time. You don't have to make a decision right now. People are always more open when they've got more options. And the CSOs who attend the CRAFT program benefit by becoming more independent, focusing a little more on themselves, reducing their depression and anxiety and anger. Even if the loved one doesn't go into treatment, we've had many people that have come to our meetings that are in a much better place now, and their loved one is still in their addiction, but they're just changing their behavior, so there's less conflict. When we change our behavior, it changes the dynamic. I've been through it. I'm a walking testimonial. Our son's been sober for 5 years, and he's now working at the youth shelter that he ended up in. And it was all because of these tools and techniques that we learned, and how we changed our interactions with him, that gave him the opportunity to get sober. 5 important facts. We can change our behavior toward our loved one. Many people aren't thinking in those terms. It's something they have to buy into when they come to the meetings. People come, people go. They have to be open to hearing that perhaps they, might have some skin in the game if they change some of the things that they're doing. That's kind of a shift in mindset that we hope for. We can change the way we think about their problem. We can learn more about mental health and addiction in general. I found very helpful personally when we were dealing with our son. We cannot change our loved one's behavior. accepting that they're going to do what they want, not what we want, is important to recognize. You'll see that in every Albert Ellis book that you read, but it's true. Learning that I can't change what's happening. We also deal with the locus of control. We have different tools. We've got a tool called the hula hoop, what I can control internally versus what I cannot control externally. And number 5, self-care is key, focusing on myself again. The first safety tip on an airplane is to put on your oxygen mask, because you can't help anybody else until you've got your oxygen. Then you have the ability to be helpful. Key questions we will ask in a meeting are, what have you done for yourself recently? What can you do for yourself this week? What are your short-term goals? What do you value at this time? We try to help people focus less on the problems that are right in front of us and think more about what they can do to help themselves so that they feel a little more comfortable and a little more confident. If I haven't slept and I'm feeling completely stressed out, now is not the time for a conversation. These are 12 important factors. So we have what we call the 6 do's and the 6 don'ts. 1, do ask permission to engage in a conversation with your loved one about their addiction. I can't tell you how this changed my life with my son, especially because I'm in the industry. I always thought I knew what was right. I had all sorts of ideas, but I never thought to ask permission. Is it okay if we talk about this? And we do teach people that if they say no and they're not in the mood, that it's no. Go for a walk. Just because I feel like dealing with this right now doesn't mean that you do. That was an important thing for me to learn as a mother who struggled. My son struggled for 10 years. Do think about when the best time to engage is. That's another good one that I learned. We never did talk about, people always have seriously bad interactions when somebody is in an altered state, most of the time. After they've had a rest, after they've had a meal, after you've had some rest, or after you've had a meal, we go through all of these with people when we do the meetings. Engaging when tired or hungry is not a good plan. It's interesting how it's the same for people who struggle with addiction, the HALT principle. So we teach them that, oh yeah, gee, I wasn't thinking. I was all over him as soon as he came in. He was late again. And these are just patterns. So we help people realize that they're in a pattern and that we can change that pattern. It's not right to engage with them right now. We'll engage another day, tomorrow, midday, after he slept it off. Number 3, do reinforce the positive things that they do with descriptive praise. And as we teach what descriptive praise is, we have role play lessons where we do that. 4, do remember that good things can happen. Try to watch for those good things, however small they are. If he simply puts out the garbage, that's something to build on. And it sounds crazy, but it's not when you're in crisis mode. If he's done something well, make sure that he knows about it. Do ask your loved one how you can be helpful instead of assuming you know how. We all want to tell people when they're struggling what we think they should do. And that really did change my life when I said to my son, you know what? I really want to be helpful, but I just don't know how. Is there anything you can think of that I can do so that I can feel like I'm being helpful? Go away and think about it for a couple of days. Get back to me. Takes the urgency out of it. And that was a key thing for us when I asked my son that. He said, Mom, I haven't eaten properly in 3 months. Could we go to No Frills? And I said, yes, absolutely. Do learn as much as you can about addiction. Education is key. And moral stigma around addiction problem is not helpful. We're trying to teach people that, oh, you're just an addict, the triggering kind of language that we use that isn't helpful. Number 1, don't engage with somebody who is in an altered state. It is not wise or safe to engage with a person who has been abusing substances. Number 2, don't ask your loved one too many questions. We all do that. They might withdraw completely or disconnect and isolate. And, the problem with isolation is it can get further into detachment. And when people are actually detached from the people they really care about, that's more problematic. So we do a lot about, how can I, back off a little bit and give them some space. Number 3, don't tell them what to do. This might also trigger them. Number 4, don't try to manage or supervise their lifestyle. That's a big one, especially for catastrophizing mothers like I was. Number 5, don't catastrophize each event or turn everything into an event. Try your best to stay calm. Breathing techniques, we do a lot of breathing. Stick to the facts. When emotions are fluid, things can get out of hand pretty quickly. So when emotions are running high, being mindful of that. Go out for a walk. Take the dog for a walk versus engaging when you're in that emotional state, watching for it. Number 6, don't fortune tell because you saw certain behaviors. You're always anticipating the same behavior. We cannot really predict what's going to happen, and we can make more problems for ourselves when we're in that mode. This also relates to cognitive distortions, which we go over with them, jumping to conclusions, mind reading, all of that kind of thing. Natural consequences. This is an actual little case study. This was I did on clients that I was working with. I worked with families in the past. I also work with people who have the addiction problem. So this was actually a couple that I was working with quite a few years back. When CSOs allow their loved one to experience natural consequences, it presents the possibility for long-term change. When the CSO prevents the experience, it is not helpful, and it prevents the opportunity for change. We're always planting these seeds. This is an example. Jerry has been going out most nights and gets very drunk. He comes home late and he becomes argumentative. He's not been spending time with the family during mealtime. He actually misses that. Last night, he threw up most of the night and is still in bed this morning. He didn't go to work. His wife, Eileen, phones his work to make up a dental appointment excuse, cleans up the vomit, and wakes him up. She drives him to work, so he's only a few hours late. She does not want Jerry to upset his boss or to lose his job. The alternative approach. Eileen starts her day cleaning the house and then leaves to go grocery shopping. Jerry gets up in the afternoon and he's very upset that he did not get to work. He accuses Eileen for not getting him up and blames her for his being late. Eileen says, "I'm sorry that you feel bad about not getting to work today. I would appreciate it if you would clean up our room. I'm going to go for a walk." When she returns, the vomit is cleaned up, and negative consequences for his actions, and Jerry is gone. Situation diffused. Understanding the difference between diffusing situations versus aggravating your LO is a key component. This presents the opportunity for Jerry to deal with his boss and experience the natural consequences from his addiction. When you experience natural consequences, you get to a point where you say, "I just can't do this anymore." In 12-step, they say, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired," right? You've got to allow that. If you're preventing that, it just continues. The problem just gets worse. These consequences can be a motivating factor for Jerry to change. Eileen can then say, she can offer a validating statement. "I'm very sorry that your boss gave you a warning today. I know your job's important to you and you must feel terrible. Would you like to join us for dinner tonight? I made a really nice meatloaf." Jerry has the opportunity to acknowledge that he values his job, make a validating statement, and show empathy. He gets the opportunity to decide whether he wants to join them for the meal, which is a reward, and spend time with the family, which is a reward, versus going out to get drunk. Note, The family had previously asked that he not join them for a meal when he was drunk. So he was already experiencing those consequences. He had cooperated, but indicated that he really missed having meals with his family. So by Eileen being, understanding, oh, I'm sorry that happened for you. She allowed it to happen. She offered, an empathetic statement. And then, would you like to join us? He was clearly shook up about the situation, and he decided, well, I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to lose my job. Maybe I'll go to a meeting. This is the craft induction for counselors. So we stay client focused and we collaborate with them. It's always about collaboration. What do you think? What do you think might work here? Socratic questioning, evocative questioning for change talk. Allow the CSO to express their frustration and their emotions. Begin to identify problem areas through what we have a functional analysis, which is just a breakdown of their behavior. We use positive reinforcement with both CSOs and loved ones. So when you're client focused, you're being very supportive with the family member for what they're doing and how they're trying to change, however small it is. Oh, I changed the way I was talking to him this week. Well done. Great. How did that go? What were the benefits? Always using the term benefits is important because they go, oh yeah, I did benefit from that. It's not something we're generally, associating with when we're dealing with somebody who's struggling with addiction and we're trying to get our point across. Describe craft's goals and procedures, of course, and describe the expected role of the CSO, which is taking their time, making their own personal choices as they can. Begin to establish the reinforcers and the reward system that's relevant to the loved one's values. That's basically what you're trying to achieve. This is the 8 procedures and descriptions. 1 is the functional analysis of the substance abuse. 2, sobriety sampling strategy and moderation discussion. In many cases, moderation is something people want to choose. And from experience, I've always said, we all know that mental health and addiction recovery is a process. And there are, in my view, there are 3 different processes. There's the acceptance process. First, I have to accept I have a problem. Then there's the change process. What does change look like for me? What do I think I can feasibly change right now? If I'm frightened about giving it up completely, moderation may be in the discussion. So support that strategy if that's what they need at that time, because it's their choice on their terms. And then they realize through that process they can't moderate. The recovery process is almost like the 3rd process. But going through that process is helpful because they learn, well, I can't moderate. We often have people that you don't see at a smart recovery meeting for about a year or so. I've had many of these folks. And they come back and they go, hey, Joe, great to see you. How's everything? Well, I thought I'd try moderation. Well, how did that work for you? Well, I'm back. And everybody has a chuckle. Okay, well, glad you're here. Well, I'm glad you're still here because I'm back. And that's as far as it goes. But it's like, well, you went through that process. So great decision coming back. The next one is the personal relapse prevention strategy, which you work on, as you probably are all doing already, which is a cognitive prevention plan, behavior skills training, dialectical behavior therapy, etc., whatever else is in the mix, job skills training, if that's applicable, social and relational counseling, relationship counseling, if they need, if they have partners, family, and friends. These are the 5 basic tips that Bob Myers developed. 1, your loved one has options in addiction recovery. No matter what the nature of the problem, it can go one of 3 ways. If nothing changes, it can get worse. If there is resistance to change, it'll stay the same. Or it can improve over time, accepting change and practicing new tools and techniques. 2, small steps carry you long distances. Observing that supporting your loved one's small successes provides a positive reinforcement environment, as opposed to criticizing them all the time. We learn how to use descriptive praise when observing these positives, however small, and we build on these successes, offering a reward when applicable. We actually have, charts where they plan out what they're going to do if something good happens, so that they're on point at the time, so they don't miss the opportunity to give that little bit of praise. Number 3, emotions are fluid. When you are frustrated, hurt, angry, exhausted, remember these feelings are responses to current situations. When you change the way you interact with your loved one, the communicative dynamic and overall situation will change, because they can't behave the same way when you change how you're behaving. Number 4, asking for help is a good thing. We thrive best when we work together by sharing our experiences and our abilities. Attending a peer support group is helpful when we have an open mind. So we always bring that up in these meetings, because sometimes it takes people a while to accept that if they change some of the stuff that they're doing, that things might change. Number 5, patience pays off. Family substance use problems do not develop overnight. It takes time, more understanding about the problem, and changing our behavior that's not been helpful for our loved one. This method has proven to enhance the general family dynamic, providing everyone with an open environment for change. This process works over time. And it does work. David and my husband and Michael and I have been running our family and friends program for about 8 years now. And we've got so many people that have been really helped. And one thing that I can't stress enough is, if we can engage families and their loved ones. We've seen families where we're doing the family and friends meeting, and the person's at the addiction meetings, and it's so amazing to see how they've changed. We've got lots of testimonials and thank you notes, thank you emails from families and people with addiction that have actually engaged on both sides. It's really helpful. But again, you need a buy-in for the family as well as a buy-in for the person with the addiction. It's a choice. These are the 10 messages. Research has shown that family members can successfully learn techniques to engage with their loved one who are in addiction and lead them into treatment. Guiding. I like to use the term guiding. Number 2, you're not alone. Number 3, this is a fun one. I can't change them because Bob Myers developed them, but you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. He always throws that in because his mother used to say that to him. And he said, if I'm nicer, maybe something better will happen. You can have as many tries as you want. He always says life is full of experiments and you can try as many times as you want. And that's the first thing I say to somebody that's had a slip or a setback. You can have a happier life whether or not your loved one becomes abstinent. That's an interesting concept, but it's true. It's your decision. Number 6, when you help yourself, you can help your family. Number 7, neither you nor your loved one is crazy. People, especially for people who are in crisis mode. All people have problems, and addiction and substance use disorder are problems, and problems can be solved with time and patience. Number 8, the world is not black and white. Most problems vary in degree and difficulty. That's putting it in perspective. Number 9, scientific studies have shown that labels like addict and alcoholic can create a stigma that might be a major barrier for people when seeking help for substance abuse. We do have the data to show that. It's kind of judgmental. My son is a great big book zealot. He's been sober for 5 years, and he likes to call himself an alcoholic because he says, Mom, that reminds me that I'm a monster when I drink, and it's not an option for me. And I go, if that works for you, that's exactly what you do. And that's how we support that in terms of if it's helpful, then it's helpful. Number 10, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain by getting involved with this process. You can even gain a few things here and there. These are the 7 tips. It is now 8:26, Jennifer. I don't know if you want, there's too many slides here. These are actually quite good. And I can just show you a couple of, I don't have the functional analysis in the presentation, but there's a happiness scale that we go through with clients to figure out where they're at, 1 to 10. These are just the various aspects of their life. And then these are the 7 tips for positive communication. Number 1, be brief. No long drawn out explanations. 2, be positive. Try to be as positive as you can, whenever you can. If you can't, go for a walk. Number 3, refer to specific behaviors. It's about the behavior. It's not you do this, so I feel this. It's when this happens, then I have a chance to label it with my I statement, which is number 4. Offer an understanding statement. For example, I appreciate that you have these concerns, or I understand you really want to talk right now and it feels urgent. Or, I'd love to be there for you. We teach people understanding statements that they can use. There's all sorts of them, and we're still making more of them up. In the meetings, we're sort of building on different tools. Number 6, accept partial responsibility. This step is really designed to decrease defensiveness on the part of your loved one. It's not about accepting responsibility for things you're not responsible for. It's to direct you towards the piece that you can own for yourself and what you can take responsibility for, the ways that you communicate, and what you think you know and what you think you don't know. And then number 7 is offer to be helpful. However, ask how or how you can be helpful, as opposed to assuming you know how.
That was amazing. There's so much that's there.
There's a lot more. It's terrible. I've got about 30 seconds. I had another case study of somebody who's got an addiction, but it's all too much. But at least it gives you a sense of what we're sort of trying to help them with, very similar tools. That they
Yeah, they're kind of in parallel, which makes so much sense. There's a question, are there virtual craft meetings available? I think the answer is yes.
Yep. Wednesday night. My husband, David, and a lovely man named Michael run the Smart Recovery Toronto Family and Friends meeting, and it's been going for 8 years. We've got some alumni there. It's a very different style of meeting than the addiction meetings. It can get very emotional. They're lovely, gentle, intelligent men, and they really manage things very well. There's a lot of quiet time. Sometimes we just let people feel how they're feeling, but it's very supportive. And there are people that have been with us for quite some time that do tap in from time to time to make sure that the newcomers are welcomed.
So I just want to ask you to repeat the LOVE of the love principle. I feel like if there's one acronym I can take away.
Yes, it's one of the best tools we have, and I teach it on both. A lot of these tools from family and friends, I'll often teach in the addiction meetings as well, because they need communicational skills. Love is listening, offering what you think you heard, validating whatever they're feeling or saying, and then empathizing. This is the best tool on the planet. I think everybody alive should learn how to do that, because it's a skill. Active listening, reflective listening is really what it's about. Did I think I heard XYZ? No, that's not what I meant. Oh, okay. What did you mean? It's a great tool for any of us that work in the industry, I believe. Even salespeople, like it's just one of the best tools that I think exist. And to be mindful of using.
So many of these tools feel like they could be so broadly applied to improve our communications that I can think of many situations in my home that are not necessarily substance related, right? So
exactly.
And then that fear of letting natural consequences take their course.
That's an art form. It's difficult. but we went through it and we did it. And he's been sober 5 years, and we are